All right, it is finally happening. The Trump shutdown that they swore voters were going to blame on Democrats has completely backfired. We have the data. We're going to discuss the implications, and then I'll tell you what this means, unfortunately, for some of the safety net programs that I know some people in my audience depend on. So we're going to talk about all of that. We've got new polling. Reuters Ipsos poll says half of Americans now blame Republicans compared to 43% who blame Democrats for the shutdown. Now, with all of these bits of data, there's the upside and there's the downside, and they're kind of both the same. The upside is half of Americans correctly blame Republicans for the shutdown, and that is a plurality. It's sort of a majority, and it's also a plurality, right at 50%. The downside is, despite Democrats controlling nothing, 43% of Americans still think Democrats are responsible for the shutdown. But we know Republicans control everything, White House, House, and Senate. And the kicker is the following. Trump's approval actually has ticked up a little bit during all of this, according to Reuters Ipsos. Now, in other polling, Trump's never been lower in approval. That's what the overall numbers say, and we'll get to those later. But the point here is Trump, as it's not good for Trump that Americans are blaming Republicans, but it is good for Trump that Americans seem to be blaming Republicans in the Senate and the House, but not really Donald Trump personally. And there are people out there convinced that Donald Trump is playing some kind of remarkable 4D chess. Even though you look around and, federal workers are furloughed and airports are backed up, economists say that the shutdown is costing $15 billion a week. Despite all of that, we have Trump sort of getting less of the blame than Republicans' bigger picture. I don't really think that matters because politically, this is increasingly looking like a disaster. Going into it, Republicans tried to frame it all as Democrat obstruction. We need 60 votes. We don't have 60 in the Senate. So by mathematical definition, this is partially a result of Democrats. They won't, they're insisting that we need to extend healthcare subsidies, and they're not coordinating in all of it. Well, it turns out that 72% of Americans support the Obamacare subsidies, including even half of Republicans. So the brilliant plan from the Republican Party was, we're going to shut down the government and try to take away something most Americans like, and then try to blame it on Democrats. And fortunately, and it's not by a huge margin, which is sad, but fortunately, it has not worked to convince the American people. Now, Republicans realize this, which is why they're now even more desperate to blame Democrats. Senator John Thune lied, saying he negotiated with Democrats on ending the shutdown, but it turns out their last negotiation was September 29th. It's been almost a month. And meanwhile, Democrats are fighting for healthcare subsidies, which a lot of these Republicans seem really not to care about preserving. Take a listen to what Senate Majority Leader John Thune said yesterday leaving the White House.
I mean, you are now 3 weeks into this shutdown, and the two sides don't appear to even be talking. Do you owe it to the American people to at least be negotiating?
Well, I think we are. We have negotiated. I don't know what there is to negotiate. This is about opening up the government. We have offered them several off-ramps now. The Democrats want something that's totally untenable, as Senator Barrasso said. I mean, they want $1.5 trillion in new spending. They want free health care for people who are non-citizens in this country. That is just a flat non-starter. It doesn't pass the Senate. It won't pass the House. It won't be signed into law by the president.
Now, remember, Democrats don't want free health care for undocumented immigrants. That is not anywhere. What is true is that if you go into an emergency rooms are not immigration checkpoints. Emergency rooms don't check people's papers. Emergency rooms are legally required to stabilize and provide basic treatment, and then figure out what is the ability to pay for treatment of the individual. Do we transfer them, et cetera? But when Republicans say, oh, Democrats want to give undocumented immigrants free health care, we have a law that ERs don't turn people away and nurses don't start saying, let me see your passport. But they want to just keep lying and lying and lying.
What you do have is a bill that's passed the House, sitting at the desk in the Senate, that the president's prepared to sign to open up the government. So I'm not sure, people keep saying, negotiate. what? I don't know what that is right now. The government needs to open up, and then we're happy to sit down and talk about any other issues that Democrats want to talk about.
Yeah. The people who shut the government down are defiantly saying this thing needs to open up. Now, I don't think Trump is really going to evade blame for this over the long term. You know, Trump's kind of looking at the numbers and going, well, Americans are blaming Republicans, but my approval is like more or less flat. It's still very low. It's still terrible, but it's more or less flat. Think about what it actually means. What we have is a situation where governing failure doesn't move public opinion because expectations are so damn low. In other words, voters' expectations are low, and hyperpartisanship has people so dug in, so polarized, that even a record-breaking shutdown barely registers. And that kind of confirms something that Trump said. He could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. He could light the Capitol on fire. 40% of the country would go, I approve of the job that he is doing, maybe 37%. So what I think we are finding as we think this through is that Republicans don't really understand the country that they broke. They assumed that the old rules still apply. You can spin your way out of a shutdown just by blaming the other side. But we have a very fragmented informational landscape, and it's so saturated with right-wing propaganda that even when people see who is responsible, they often retreat into their team's narrative, except that the propaganda bubble is now leaking because you look at the polling and there's cracks. Independents, soft Republicans, sort of like non-Trump Republicans, they're saying ultimately this is a Republican shutdown. They're not buying that Democrats did this. And I think the symbolism here is significant because Trump came into office with this whole we're going to run government like a business. Now, some of us said Trump's not so good at running businesses. In fact, Trump, if he had taken his inheritance and just put it in the S&P 500, he'd be wealthier than having spent decade after decade running businesses sort of okay, but really not that well, and declaring bankruptcy many times. So as we look at the economic landscape now, we see layoffs increasing, we see furloughed and unpaid workers, and dysfunction at the top with no ability or even apparently desire to fix this. And some of Trump's allies are privately starting to panic because they thought, oh, the shutdown will give us leverage. It'll give us leverage to do things that we want to do. But that narrative is collapsing. Republicans are blaming them. And it's worse for your Senate and House Republicans so far than it has been for Donald Trump. So I don't know how much longer this thing is going to go. If it drags on a lot longer, it could easily turn into the kind of movement that breaks through even to Donald Trump's voters, because as more things happen, like what's happening to the farmers, just to others, like non-farmer workers and Republicans, the loyalists are going to start to say, what the hell are we doing here? This doesn't make any sense. This isn't working. So Trump's approval is low but holding right now. But this is the kind of slow burn political disaster that I think could very quickly accelerate. And I think that I believe Republicans are going to be increasingly incentivized soon to convince Trump to help them get government reopened, because the bill is going to come due, for lack of a better term. And I want to look at some of the systems that are now starting to fail.